Welcome back to Free Media. I'm Robby Soave.
And I'm Niall Stanage. President Trump suggested to reporters that he could be allowed to do whatever he wants and send other branches of the US military into American cities. Cause for concern, perhaps? Let's take a look.
What did you mean last night when you said you were prepared to send more than the National Guard into American cities?
Sure, I would. I would do that if it was necessary. You know, if it was necessary, I'd do that, but it hasn't been necessary. We're doing a great job without that, but yeah, if it was necessary. As you know, I'm allowed to do that.
Do you mean other branches of the military you would send in, or?
If it were, who are you with?
The New York Times.
Well, that's very good, very good. Well, if you write it correctly, I'll give you the answer. But, you know, if I want to enact a certain act, I'm allowed to do it routinely, and about 50% of presidents have used that, as you know, and I'd be allowed to do whatever I want. But we haven't chosen to do that because we're doing very well without it. But I'd be allowed to do that, you understand that. And the courts wouldn't get involved, nobody would get involved, and I could send the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, I could send anybody I wanted. But I haven't done that because we're doing so well without.
Yeah, look, Trump does not recognize limits on his abilities, his power, anything. So that sounded not great, the comments he made. I sort of wish reporters would not, I mean, they can do whatever they want, but if you're being tactical about it, you can always get Trump to say, well, he's considering doing
not
something.
Ruling it out.
He doesn't rule things out. It's not getting ruled out. I said this so many times now when we've talked about him seeking a third term. I don't believe he's going to seek a third term. Actually, the clip from the other day where he was asked about it, now I've heard clearer audio where he actually did acknowledge, he said, you know, it says pretty clearly that we can't do it. But,
Too
you know,
bad,
we'll look at it. Too bad,
says.
but we'll look at it. I really don't think he's going to do it. But you'll never get him to say, hard no, can't, won't, there's some limit. It's almost like the reporters should say, you know, everyone's saying everything's great in these cities now, and you've done such a great job, and it's time to say mission accomplished and send everybody home. And be like, well, they are saying that. They're saying I did a great job. Call all the troops back. Like, that's how you would tactfully kind of lead Trump toward a more freedom-oriented or small government consensus, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they're really in the business of leading him toward a small government consensus, though. Look, I think that the danger here, as distinct from the third term topic, which is a whole other conversation, is Trump already obviously has deployed the National Guard. You and I might, you know, wander outside this building and see troops outside on the street in DC right now. I considered that to be for a confected crisis that didn't really exist, crime rates falling and so on and so forth. For him then to go on to say, I can deploy other areas or other elements of the military as I wish, and I have the power to do it, and it's something that I would consider if the existing troops don't get the job done. That in itself seems very worrisome to me, because the fundamental dynamic here is one in which he's just constantly stretching the justification for putting soldiers on the street. And I think there are very good reasons, and I think many libertarians would agree there are very good reasons for that not to happen, barring exceptional circumstances.
That's very limited power, one exercised if we are actually invaded by a foreign nation, not just to deal with routine law enforcement issues, not because there is a serious illegal immigration problem. The justification they're somewhat going with in many of these cities is that there are federal buildings or there are federal personnel, federal law enforcement. They're saying, well, they're coming under attack. In some cases, it's just they're coming under protest, which is not a worthy thing to be countered by national law enforcement or anyone else. It is true there might be some justification if there's actual attack on a federal building for something to happen, but that does risk this very same slippery slope that it's almost then they want to put people in harm's way so that they can send in the troops, which is actually the same thing that happens abroad. Ironically enough, some of my more libertarian members of Congress, like Rand Paul, have called for us to close military bases that we have, for instance, in Africa, where they're feuding factions or tribes, and because if we get hit, well, then we're going to respond. And there's no point for us to be there, but we're just inviting some kind of catastrophe that we have to respond to. And it's like, why are we doing this?
Right. I think that's a fair point. On the previous point that you mentioned about, federal buildings and so forth, like Trump in that clip we played was alluding to the Insurrection Act. What that is about is a situation where the rule of law literally is endangered, is on the brink of collapse in some fashion. What Trump and people like Stephen Miller seem to be reinterpreting it to mean is where there is law breaking, you can just declare an insurrection. If a situation is not entirely free of crime, you can declare an insurrection and send in the troops. That just seems A, wrong, and B, potentially catastrophic.
The Air Force, the Navy,
exactly.
Get them all in there.
Exactly.
See what he's saying.
And it's just very, very dangerous to have any president, but I would argue particularly this one, take upon himself that kind of power, that kind of leeway to put armed forces on the street or on the seas in a way that I think is easily liable to become very repressive and potentially used against American citizens.
Well, and allow any president is a key part of this because, one argument that I wish Republicans who are very supportive of Trump would grapple with more seriously is that they are not really using this opportunity of total control over the government to constrain in any way what a future Democratic administration could do. On the contrary, they're kicking open the door to all sorts of escalations. And I know, because I argue with them all the time, they'll say, well, the Democrats are going to do that anyway.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's kind of, but there are real material things you could do now to make that much, 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 much more difficult. And instead, you're going as far in the other direction as possible.
Yeah, and then all of those things can be potentially utilized by the next person, and then it zigs and zags constantly. This is why, from the Liberal perspective, I have never been in favor of packing the Supreme Court, because I think you set a precedent and the thing becomes ludicrous, and then 30 years from now we have 37 member bench Supreme Court because everyone keeps adding 6 or 8 justices to it every time they get power. It would just get into an absurd situation.
Yeah, or it would be like our gerrymandering situation, which is they're going to do it and they're going to respond and they're going to respond and they're going to respond. They should all just stand down on that one for the time being, because if they do the Texas thing, they're going to do the California thing. And
and it undercuts the legitimacy of the whole process.
It does. And it makes it much less democratic, because now people are voting in not competitive districts all over the country. More free media right after this.